Woodcraft since 1928, providing traditional and modern woodworking tools and supplies to generations of craftsmen. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Well, hi, come on in. My name is Rick Butz. Welcome to Woodcarving. Today, we're going to be carving one of my favorite birds, this realistic chickadee. This is a common bird around my part of the woods, and they come around to the feeders all year long. A lot of fun. Let me just show you how we do this. The bird itself is, of course, carved out of wood. The feet are cast pewter and fit into two holes drilled into the stump, and then the other end fits into a hole drilled in the body. That's how this guy goes together. These are a lot of fun to carve because you really just need a knife to do them, and it's not too difficult. Let me show you how we get started. We'll start with a piece of white pine. I made my pattern for this from watching the birds that come to my window, and I just sort of did a silhouette, cut them out with scissors, then traced them onto the piece of wood, and cut the piece of wood out with a bandsaw. Then I've gone and sketched in lightly the shape for the tail and for around the head. And this isn't really enough to bother with a bandsaw. We can take this off quite easily with just a knife. You could also use basswood on this carving. Oh, one other thing I should point out. When we laid this bird out on the wood to cut him out, make sure you lay him out so the grain of the wood goes from the beak to the tail here, lengthwise. So this is kind of the direction your whole board is running. The reason for this is, with the grain running lengthwise through the tail, that'll make the tail a lot stronger here. If it were running across the piece like this, when you got down into the tail here, this would be cross grain, and it would tend to be very fragile and easy to split off. Now when we're carving, you probably notice that I keep talking about working with a grain. And you can see here, if I start carving in here, this knife digs in. Whereas if I come around the other direction, it makes a nice shaving. That's called carving with a grain. And that just means that in one direction, the knife will kind of dig into the fibers of the wood, and from another direction it'll carve cleanly. With this carving, we're going to be going down in a direction like this for the tummy here, and starting from the high spot we'll be coming down this direction in order to carve with a grain. For the top of the head, we'll want to work down into this direction and down into this direction. And of course in the back we can just go straight on down. And these are the directions we'll be working the tools to carve with a grain. You see what I mean? See how smoothly that carves away there? This business of carving with a grain is something that, well, seems kind of confusing at first, but it really comes easily with just a little practice. It's like petting a dog or a cat. One way feels right and one way doesn't. And as soon as you put the tool to the wood, it'll either feel right or it doesn't. If you should be carving along and you feel the tool start to dig in, just stop and come around and carve from the opposite direction. This cut I'm using is called sort of the basic paring cut, or basic whittling cut. And this one you just brace your thumb against the piece of wood and then slowly close the fingers of your hand and draw the knife towards you. Remember, don't pull the knife towards you with your whole power of your hand. You don't have any control that way. I like to take and work out these outlines here first before I start rounding them off, and that gives me a much better idea of the general shape I'll be working. For this side, I'm going to be using something called a levering cut, where I just brace my left thumb against the back of the knife and then just pivot it. And that clears away that wood very quickly. One of the tricks to using white pine is make sure it's air dried, or something that's been dried naturally out in the out of doors, but covered and protected from the rain. And that'll make the wood very soft and easy to carve. If it's been kiln dried or heated and forced to dry, it can tend to make the wood very hard and brittle. And just keep plugging along on that and he'll shape out okay. Now, one of the things you want to be careful of is when we're carving the tail here, it's easy to try and make this tail too thin. You can cut the edges of it thin, well, like on this guy over here. The edges have been cut down very thin, but the central portion is fairly thick, and that makes it much sturdier than it appears. You're actually creating the illusion of delicate feathers with the wood. Let me show you another carving here. This is one where we've gone ahead and the bird is pretty much shaped out and the cuts have been smoothed down. And this is the tail. The feathers have been carved into the tail, but notice it appears very thin and fragile. Actually, the center part of this tail is about twice as thick as the edge. It's not real thick, but it's much thicker than it appears at the edges. It's just a little illusion for creating delicate feathering. Make sure that you have the general shape of the bird worked out. Okay? Each bird is different in a little bit different in its proportions. For example, with a chickadee, the head is fairly large in proportion compared to the rest of the body. And it doesn't have much of a neck. So you have to get the general shape of the bird right first. Then you can worry about putting your details on. No matter what kind of details you add to a carving, if the shape isn't right to begin with, it's not going to really enhance the appearance of the bird. It's still not going to have the same feeling or personality that a chickadee would have. So know your bird. Get out to your bird feeder and watch him and do your drawings from that. The other thing too you want to watch is when you're carving the beak here, chickadees have a very distinctive little beak. And it's not a large, thick one like a sparrow or something that chews a lot of seeds. And it's not long and pointed like a robin. It's just kind of a small little pointed beak that's good for cracking open small seeds, or what they do with a lot is they'll use it to go and get eggs and bugs out of cracks in the bark. Now this tail on the bird has already been feathered, and let me just show you how we carve these feathers. You start out, take your knife, and I'm holding in a pencil grip, and just taking and size a little line around there. Come around here, make another one. Then just take the bird and carefully slice that away. And that gives us a feather. You don't need to go very deep or take off too much. Remember, feathers are very thin, so you just need a little bit of a layer there. Another way you can do that is you can take a small V-tool, and this is a 3mm V-tool. It's got two flat sides that form a sharp cutting edge in the center. You can take that and just carve around the outline of the feather. This goes a little bit quicker than using just a knife. Also, it doesn't leave quite as sharp an edge in the bottom, so it gives a little softer overall appearance when you're done. And then after you've made that cut, you just go along and pare away a very thin shaving. Now see, that's very thin. You can actually see light through that shaving. So we're not taking off a whole lot here. Now when you're doing your feathers, you'll want to make sure that they're laid out right. Now in this guy over here, for the tail feathers, the center tail feather always lies in the middle, and then the others kind of overlap on either side of it, kind of like the shingles of a roof. On the side here, we have a very thin row of feathers called the coverts, and then we have another grouping called the secondaries, and then we get down to the longer primaries. These are the major flight feathers of the bird and the ones that form the tip of its wings. So when you're drawing these out on your bird, try to get the feather grouping right. And every bird's going to have a little bit different arrangement of the feathers, and this helps add to the realism that we're striving for. After you get the bird carved out and have the feathers all finished, then it's time to start doing some of the finishing details. And this is a bird that has had the feathers all carved here. We've got an eye in here, and it's been painted white. This is a coating of paint called gesso, which is a white primer that we'll be using on it. And this gives you a good base for painting your colors over it. This is a trick that Audubon learned, and that's one of the reasons why his paintings were so popular and so lifelike, is because he put white underneath. And he found that when you painted the other colors over it, this white let some of the colors show back through. And it duplicated the illusion that we have on a real bird. We have the colored feathers over top and then the soft gray and white feathers underneath, the downy feathers. The eye we're using is glass, and it's handmade in West Germany. And this is what they look like. They come clear, and you can buy them from a number of different decoy carving and wood carving supply companies in America. And I paint the back of them with a color depending on the particular bird. This one I used burnt sienna and a little burnt umber acrylic to give the color of the iris of the chickadee. Now to set that in, we just take and get a very small gouge. This one I'm using here is one that I found in a block or linoleum block cutting kit. It's an inexpensive tool, but it just happens that it has a very good quality of steel in it. We'll just take the curved edge and walk that around. And then cut that away. I usually have chickadees coming to my bird feeder all year round, right outside my window. So when I'm carving, I can be sitting there watching the birds, and I have my models. Now my cats also like chickadees. They're indoor cats, so they don't get out to eat them. But they like to sit on the windowsill and watch these chickadees come to the feeder, and they'll sit there and twitch their tails and mutter. Chickadees don't seem to mind. The chickadees kind of enjoy having the company, I guess. But it's funny because you got 2 ounces of bird and 30 pounds of cat waiting on either side of the glass. Check the fit of the eye here to make sure it fits in the hole okay. And then we're ready to set it in. I'm going to use something called epoxy putty for this. And then we take the eye. These eyes come affixed to a piece of wire. We don't need the wire, so we just take and snip it off with a pair of wire cutters. And then we very carefully set that eye into the hole. Now I'll use a pencil, the rubber tip of an eraser, to push that in. This rubber grips against the eye, so you can kind of move it around and point it whatever direction you want, so that it looks like the bird is looking forward slightly. And when you push that in, it oozes out a little putty around the edge. Before you wipe that off, just take and smear that around the edge of the eye there. This epoxy putty cures in about 2 hours, so you've got plenty of working time here. You take a little toothpick and you just shape that around, and that'll form the eyelid. Also, it sort of forms around the curvature of the glass eye, and when this hardens, it'll bond that glass to the wood real well. It won't come loose. And there's our eye. Now this guy's ready to start painting. I take a stick where I've got a wood screw that's been fitted into the stick and glued in. I take that, and where one of the leg holes will be, which is about a third of the way back, or about maybe 3/8 of an inch back from the center of the bird, I drill a hole where the leg will go, and then I can fasten my stick to that. So that'll give me some way to hold it while I'm painting them. Now for paints, I'm going to use oil paints for this. The reason why is that the oil paints dry slowly. And for the blending I'm going to be doing, I don't want something that's going to dry fast like acrylic. I really need something that's going to take a little time to dry. The colors I'm using are titanium white, ivory black, then a mixture of yellow ochre and titanium white. And for the gray, a lot of people have a tendency to take and mix black or white to come up with a gray. And that gives you kind of a real dull gray. Instead, for this color I used a little burnt umber and ultramarine blue. And you can see over on this other guy that it gives you kind of a nice warm gray. You mix a little white in there to soften the color up, and it gives you a color that very closely duplicates the real color of a chickadee. Now to paint this on, just take a small brush like this number 4, take the paint, and just slap it on. You don't have to be real careful about this, just make sure you cover all the white. Now I'll paint the tummy color on here. The best look I get at chickadees is often in the winter. They have a habit of sometimes flying into the window. And they're a small enough bird it doesn't hurt them too much, but it does stun them. And sometimes when it gets real cold, or anytime it gets below freezing for that matter, the birds, if they sit in the snow stunned for very long, they'll freeze. So whenever we hear a bird crashing into our workshop window, everybody runs out and looks around through the snowdrifts to find the chickadee, and then we bring him in, put him in a cardboard box, and just sort of let him come to his senses in a place where it's warm. And it's kind of fun when you pick these guys up. They're so light and so small and so fluffy. It's really quite an experience. And of course the bird's a little bit out of it, so he doesn't really mind. There's a tummy. Let's see. Using a number 4 here, and I'll paint the white on for his face. It doesn't matter if you get a little paint on the eyes here. That'll just scrape right off when it's dry. Now these colors I'm using are a type of oil paints called alkyds. And they have a little different oil base. They have an alkyd resin or something for the base. And they dry much quicker than the old-fashioned oil colors. These will dry in a couple of days, whereas the old oils might take a week or so. Speaking of birds in the winter, last winter I was driving along the road and saw this grosbeak sitting by the road. Now that's not quite like a chickadee. It's a large, yellowish black bird. But I think what had happened is a big truck had gone by and a blast of wind had kind of stunned this bird. And he's sitting by the road. He couldn't fly. And it was about, 25 degrees below zero. So he wasn't going to last very long there. So I thought, well, I'd better get this bird and bring him in. So I had some errands to run in the car. I just picked up the bird, put him on the front seat of the car. He just sat there. So I was driving around town running my errands, and here was this bird just sort of sitting around looking out the windows. He had a great time. He just didn't fly around, just sat there and enjoyed the scenery. I think he thought it was a real luxury treatment. Then I got home, and between the car heater and a nice leisurely drive, the bird seemed to have recovered. And I opened the door, and he walked to the door and flew away. But it's just the funniest thing driving around town with this bird in my front seat looking around. Now for doing the texturing on this, here's a little trick. I'm taking a rather coarse bristle brush that's a little frayed at the ends here. And by taking this, I can go and I can just cut right through that paint. And I'm sort of stroking this along, texturing it the way the barbs would fall on the feather, so that when you get done, it has the illusion of feathers. You can't recreate nature 100%. And there's no percentage in trying to duplicate nature exactly. What you're really trying to do is recreate the illusion of realism in the birds. There. Now can you see that kind of gives, when that dries, that'll have a nice little texture. It looks just like feathers on there. Now for doing the tummy, I'm just going to take and gently stroke the paintbrush along here, and that'll texture this paint so it looks like little barbs of feathers. I think it's a nice, soft little texture there. I remember one time we were at a wildlife show and we had taken along a couple of our carvings, and there was a nice, real sweet little gal there. I don't know, I think she was in her late 70s. And you could tell she's just normally a very nice person. But she thought that we were stuffing chickadees. And she thought that we had been taking these things and gluing the feathers on, and she was someone who really liked chickadees. And it took a lot of explaining to her that, no, these were wood carvings with paint on them. And I thought we were going to get hit over the head with an umbrella. But she calmed down after a while. It was kind of grim for a few minutes, though. And what I'm doing here, where we have this color zone where it's blending from the white into the dark, I'm going to take and just very lightly drag the paint in. And I'll wipe it off, drag some more across. Now see? It looks like feathers, sort of overlapping into the other area. Very handy little technique. I have to keep these away from my cats because they look at them and they think they're real birds, and they'll go and chew them to ribbons if they get a chance. For doing the white, I'm going to use another slightly smaller bristle brush. This is a number 2. And once again, it's kind of frayed. It seems the more worn out and frayed these brushes get, the better they work. I'm just going to take and drag this white down into the other areas. Just love the feeling this gets on them. Just looks so much like feathers. You don't want to try and carve every feather in a bird when you're carving feathers, because you don't see every feather in a bird. Especially in a chickadee like this. You never see every individual feather on them. So I guess that's what I mean when I say, work for the illusion. Don't try to recreate nature. Now we'll do the black. I save the black for last because the paint is so powerful that if you get it on your brush, it's hard to clean it out. I'm just going to take and blend his bib in. There, see, it looks just like feathers, doesn't it? These are such jaunty little birds. It's kind of interesting in the wintertime. What they do is a whole flock of them, which is usually a family grouping of, anywhere from 8 to 2 dozen. And when it gets real cold, like, well down below 0, they'll go and find a hollow tree someplace, and they'll all pack in that tree for warmth. And it's kind of funny because if you get up in the morning and you go to the bird feeder and say it's been a real cold morning, like maybe 25 or 30 below 0, these birds will come out, and invariably there'll be 1 or 2 in the group that'll have the tail feathers all twisted out of shape where he's all packed in with his friends for the night. And it looks really kind of goofy. I had a cute one come to my feeder one year. It was, must have gotten too close to a cat or a hawk or an owl or something, and he didn't have any tail feathers. And that bird looked so cute, a little bobtail chickadee. And surprisingly, he could fly quite well, too. If there was a high wind, he had a little trouble coming in for a landing, and sometimes he'd have to make a couple of passes at the bird feeder. But he was so cute. I made a carving of a bobtail chickadee once. It took about 6 weeks for the tail feathers to grow back in, and he got along very well. Well, this is our painted bird. And the eyes, you just wait until that paint is dry, then just take the point of a knife and scrape that off, and they'll come real clean. And there's your chickadee. And you should probably guess they call them chickadees because they call chickadee-dee-dee. Great call. Let me just show you some other kinds of birds you can make using these same techniques. This one is a tufted titmouse, and this is a bird that you often find in flocks mixed in with chickadees. And once again, I've used the wire feet that are painted with brown acrylic. These cast pewter feet, you just use little acrylic paint, burnt umber or something on them, and it matches the color of the bird. This other one is a bluebird, another one of my favorites. And this one here is a peregrine falcon. Now what's interesting about these birds is that each one of these are carved using the same techniques that we just used. So it doesn't matter if you're working on a small bird or a large bird. It's a very versatile series of techniques and painting techniques that you can use on just about anything to achieve a high degree of realism. Also, it's a lot of fun too. Hey, next week I'm going to be showing you how to carve our Swiss breadboard. And this is a very old style of carving called chip carving, and it's done with just a simple little knife, and it's a lot of fun. So thanks for dropping by, and until next week, this is Rick Butz wishing you happy carving.
You can continue to learn wood carving with Rick Butz with his book, How to Carve Wood. This 224-page book of challenging exercises and projects is full of detailed instructions. Lessons include whittling, wildlife carving, and relief carving. To order your copy, call 1-800-950-9648.
Woodcraft, for all your woodworking needs. Tools, supplies, lumber, project plans, and educational workshops. With a mail order catalog and stores nationwide. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.